Howdy, and welcome to Wise About Texas, the Texas History Podcast. This is your host, Ken Wise. Thanks again for tuning in for a little bit of Texas history today. Today, we're going to talk about a road and how some of the roads we drive up and down every day have a ton of history if we just take a little time to learn about it and maybe a little time to stop and look around. This particular road is in one of my favorite parts of the state, Central Texas, near the town of New Braunfels. So it's summertime, and summertime means road trips, so let's load up and take a little drive up the River Road while we get wise about Texas. I want to start this discussion in 1846. There was a geologist that came to Texas from Germany named Ferdinand Roemer, or maybe Raymer, R-O-E-M-E-R. New Braunfels was new back then, and he looked out across the Guadalupe River Valley, and he wrote down what he saw, and this is what he said in 1846, quote, "The thought came to me involuntarily upon viewing the city and the beautiful, fruitful valley from a distance. What an earthly paradise could be created here through the hands of an industrious and cultured population." He wrote that while looking at a piece of the Guadalupe River Valley near present-day New Braunfels. Now, this area has some dramatic topography near it. It's the New Braunfels and the areas around there lie just on the edge of the Balcones Escarpment. And if you look at a map of Texas, you'll see the escarpment running roughly from Del Rio through San Antonio, turning north, headed up toward Waco. And what it does is basically divides the hill country from flat prairie and river valleys. And notably, you'll see a lot of weather stall right around that area as the topography changes, but I digress. So our geologist friend Roemer and a botanist acquaintance of his named Ferdinand Lindheimer, considered the father of Texas botany, followed the course of the Guadalupe River on the edge of the escarpment, and they wrote down what they saw, the rocks and formations, and also the flora and fauna. So our first lesson of the road we're on is that if you look around at the cypress trees and wonder at the natural beauty, which you can't help but do, you're seeing the same thing that these two gentlemen saw when they first looked over this valley. But they certainly weren't the first people in this valley. The Indians used this valley because you have the confluence of two rivers, the Comal River, the shortest river in Texas, and the Guadalupe River. There are also some springs that flow in that area that feed the Comal as well as Guadalupe. And it was a gathering place for the various Indian tribes going through central Texas. Interestingly, some of the Spanish explorers made observations of this area of Texas. We can't be sure they were in exactly the same area, but they were close. And they talk about various Indian tribes camping together for months at a time in this area. So nothing like a fertile river valley, plenty of food and water to put a damper on your desire to fight each other, which was what they were doing in other parts of the state, or what would become the state. Right above New Braunfels, along the Guadalupe River, there was a large gathering, maybe 500 Tonkawa Indians living there when the Germans got there in 1845. Let me take a moment and just remind you, I've said this in several episodes, about the great German immigration to Texas in the 1840s. The association, the Society for the Protection of German Immigrants in Texas, known as the Adelsverein, came over to Texas. They had purchased some land at what was the Fisher-Miller land grant, which was north of present-day Fredericksburg, up in the Mason and Llano area. And the intention was to settle Germans up in that area. They came primarily through Indianola and Galveston, and they would travel by horse and wagon and maybe even walking up to the Guadalupe River and go west and north to Fredericksburg and on up to the land grant. Long story short, Fredericksburg was founded by some of these Germans who didn't want to travel all the way to the land grant. Many of them went all the way up there. Some settled along the way at various points. The first head of the Adelsverein was Prince Solms of Braunfels. And he decided he needed to settle some people in this beautiful valley, this confluence of the Comal and the Guadalupe, so that they could get crops in and that they weren't going to make it all the way to the Fisher-Miller Grant in an appropriate time. Plus, the immigrants were learning about the Comanches, which would prove a problem for years to come. So Prince Carl bought some land closer in to created what would be the town of New Braunfels. He settled that on Good Friday, 1845, naming the area after his ancestral home. They built a fort. The settlers built a fort. They called it the Zinkenberg, and they set up a headquarters, which they called the Sophienberg. I may not be pronouncing that exactly correctly, but it was named for Prince Carl's fiancée, Sophie. Prince Carl soon left, and the second head of the Adelsverein took charge, John Musebach. They saw some interesting things involving their new friends, the Tonkawa. One school teacher that came with those settlers was named Herman Seal, and he was a school teacher. You know, the first things the German immigrants did when they settled an area was build a school. Then they built a church. But school and education first. So Seal was a school teacher. He was a lawyer. He would end up being a state representative and an officer in the Confederate Army. He was also Comal County's first district clerk. Comal County is the county of which New Braunfels is the county seat. He wrote a book called The Treacherous, which I have here on my desk as I record this episode. It's a fascinating account of the German immigration and the things they saw. Has writings from other people in it. It's called The Treacherous. Highly recommend it. One of the first things he saw was a group of Tonkawas in camp having fought with a group of Waco Indians. They were in the process of cannibalizing one of the Waco warriors killed in the battle. His account describes one of the women of the tribe smiling, satisfied with her meal, but paying tribute to the warrior, saying that she hoped that the meal would allow her to bear sons as brave as he was. So things were complicated back then, to say the least. New Braunfels filled up fairly quickly, and people started having to move to the suburbs, as it were. And there was a gentleman in the 1870s, Wilhelm Bretsky, and he started buying land up the river. And he ended up with about 1,700 acres. Now, when you're buying 1,700 acres up in these hills, it seems like a lot more land because it is hard to get around. And Bretsky would lease some of this land to a man named Louis Klappenbach. Klappenbach branded his cattle with a KL, and when he sold the herd back to Bretsky, the Bretsky Ranch began to be known as the KL Ranch. Also up this direction, a man named Ernst Green, Gruene. He had come to New Braunfels in 1845, and he bought his land along the Guadalupe and built a house there. His son Heinrich, or Henry Green, would plant cotton, which attracted some families to work out there. He built a store. He built a cotton gin, which was right on the Guadalupe, and he built a dance hall known today as Green Hall, the oldest continuously operating dance hall in Texas. And of course, to get to all these places, you needed that road. Let me mention one more thing about the KL Ranch. The KL Ranch is still there. As tourism became a primary driver of the New Braunfels economy beginning about the 50s, that ranch property was developed into a campground, and it's now operated as two separate campgrounds. One's called KL Ranch Camp on the river, and one's called KL Ranch Cliffside. So if you visit either of those places, you're on the old Bretsky Ranch. That river road continues to the present-day town of Sattler. But before Sattler, or at least before Sattler as we know it today, there were several places at what would be the end of the river road. There was a place called Marienthal, a place called Valhalla, spelled with a W. Of course, the German pronunciation would be as a V. They called it Hidden Valley, they called it Mountain Valley, and Sattler, which is still there. Marienthal, which translates to Marie's Valley, came from a 300-acre farm, and one of the owner's wife was named Marie. Hidden Valley was a 1,000-acre farm that was on a bend of the river, so it would have been somewhat hidden and only approachable, they say, by one road. That area is now under Canyon Lake, which I'll get to in a second. But Wilhelm Sattler and his wife, Sophia, arrived in Texas in 1845. He was a bookbinder, and he was also an accountant. And he was the bookkeeper for for many of the very prominent early New Braunfels residents, including our school teacher, Herman Seal, including our botanist, Ferdinand Leinheimer. For some doctors, he was on the city council. He ended up on the Texas Land Commission and was working sometimes in Austin. He was multilingual and was well known for his extensive library, which was kept out on the ranch. His ranch was 320 acres, which he bought in 1853 from a landowner and speculator named Jacob de Cordova. Now, we need to take a little side trip off the river road for a moment and talk about de Cordova. Jacob de Cordova was born in Jamaica in 1808. His mother died at his birth, and so he was reared in England by one of his aunts. Well educated, he spoke English, French, Spanish, German, and Hebrew. His father was Jewish, and his father was a Jamaican coffee grower and an exporter. He eventually moved to Philadelphia, where Jacob came back from England to join him. And they actually were a printing family. They had been in the printing industry for many, many years, actually a couple hundred. There was one of his relatives, his ancestors was in Spain, actually published the account of Cabeza de Vaca's explorations in Texas. Jacob, we know, was in New Orleans in 1836, and if you'll think back, you'll remember that the Texas Revolution was funded by money borrowed in New Orleans, so he would have been surrounded by the fervor of Texas independence. He was also the Grand Master of the Odd Fellows, a fraternal organization. He came to Texas after the Battle of San Jacinto to install members in the Odd Fellows lodges, which were the first Odd Fellows lodges established outside the United States, were in the Republic of Texas. He decided to move here, and he moved in 1839. He lived in Galveston. He also lived in Houston. He was a state representative in the second Texas state legislature. That would have been in 1847. And he traveled all around, seeing the sights of Texas at that time. And as so many did, only he had the ability to really act on this, he started buying land. Then he went on the road, and he started talking about Texas in all over the cities in the Northeast, which of course helped his land business. He would end up laying out the town of Waco in 1848 with a couple other people, and he ended up drawing a map with a guy named Robert Kreuzbauer. We call it the de Cordova map now, and it was the foundation for many maps after it. You can look it up on the internet and see a picture of the de Cordova map. No doubt you've seen it before. That map was first published in 1849. He would then settle in Seguin, where he passed away in 1868. He is buried in the Texas State Cemetery. But before all that, he sold some land to William Sattler along the river road. Sattler would end up dying in 1880. Sattler was the postmaster for the area. The post office was located on his ranch. Oh, and I should mention what his ranch sort of looked like. He had several log cabins. One was his bookbinding office, and as well as his accounting office. And another was where he officiated as a justice of the peace. So he had his own little courthouse on his ranch. Sounds good to me. He became the postmaster, as I mentioned, in 1856, running the post office out of yet another log building on his ranch. His son Heinrich succeeded him as postmaster. Unfortunately, Heinrich was killed in the Civil War. And if you remember back to the episode about the Sisterdale revolver, many of the Germans in this area were fighting for the Confederacy. even though it's commonly thought that all the Germans were Unionists. That was not the case. So Sattler dies, and the community moves the post office to an intersection of the River Road and what is now FM 2673, and they kept the name Sattler. That old post office is still there. Wilhelm and his wife are buried near there, and the descendants of the Sattlers still live in that area. I also mentioned the name Valhalla, which was kind of interesting. In Viking mythology, or I guess it should be called Norse mythology, Valhalla is where the souls of heroic warriors who were killed in battle are received after death. So that was the name of the dance hall. And I always pronounced it Walhalla, but in German it'd be Valhalla. And that dance hall I don't think is still there. So there was a lot of activity on this river road. But I've been using the term road a little prematurely, because it really wasn't a road, it was a trail. And what I haven't mentioned explicitly is when you go from New Braunfels up this direction, you are going uphill, you are going side hill, you are going up into a canyon. It is rough country. So finally, as the population expanded and people were trying to haul their farm products to market and generally do their business, it became necessary to refine this road a little bit. The county commissioners of Comal County, and this is 1901, decided to do something about the road and officially establish it, sort of. And here's what the minutes say. They called for a public road, third class, 22 feet wide, with gates. Now, the gates would be, of course, on property lines to keep the cattle in. And I remember, and I'm sure there are still roads like this in the hill country. In fact, I know there are, where you got to get out and open a gate, and you better leave it as you found it. If it was open, you better leave it open. If it was closed and you had to open it, you better close it behind you. But on a public road, you'd have gates to keep the animals in, and that still exists, certainly exists in South Texas, although in South Texas you see a lot more of what we call bump gates, where you can just bump it with your car and open it. In any event, they sure needed it back in 1901. And the county commissioners named this road, not River Road, but Guadalupe River Drive, and we call it River Road now. And it is thought to be one of the first real roads that was built in Comal County. Another way to describe it might be a rocky trail up the side of a canyon. There's a newspaper account of a dance at the Valhalla Dance Hall, and the writer of the account said that the scenery was romantic, and he described romantic and beautiful bluffs and water scenery. But then he goes on to describe that their wagon wheel broke, as well as the shaft on the buggy. So you may have had a pretty view on the river road, but it was pretty darn dangerous. In the 1920s, as people started driving cars, the county decided to upgrade the road from third class to second class. Now, I don't know what that means. Any of you highway engineers listening to this, please tell us. Send me an email and tell me what that means. But with the advent of the automobile, roads became way more important. You had federal funds for roads. You had a gas tax in Texas in the 1920s that helped pay for roads. But there's another problem on these hill country roads, and it was a problem on this river road, and that is the low water crossings and the floods. So if you drive around the hill country, you'll come to several places on these roads that go across little creeks and such, and those low water crossings. I remember one time when I was little, we were touring the Lyndon B. Johnson Ranch in Stonewall, and they drove us across what looked to me like the Mississippi River and was really probably only 4 inches of water. And I thought we were for sure going to die. But anyway, you see the low water crossings all over the hill country. And, of course, we know the Guadalupe River is prone to flooding. So you can build all the roads you want, but if you don't put them above the grade, you're still not going to be able to get down them. So they decided to eliminate those crossings during the Great Depression, and Works Progress Administration project to do that on the river road in the 1930s. But it wasn't until the 1950s that the river road was paved, or at least paved all the way to Sattler. And that meant that tourism could occur. So the tourists now started to come up the river road. That's when businesses such as the KL Ranch that I mentioned turned into campgrounds and picnic spots. Then in the 60s, more improvements were going to be made. Some of those the remaining low water crossings were going to be eliminated. Unfortunately, there was a big scandal because the workers bulldozed probably 70 or so big cypress trees from by the river, which is probably the curse of progress. If you want the road, you're going to have to do something about the trees, but you want the trees because they're the things that making the road popular. The compromise, of course, is to build the road as narrow as possible, which makes these river roads pretty harrowing if you get cars going both directions. And eventually Canyon Dam was built, which flooded all of the area above Saddler. Not Saddler, but all the Hidden Valley, the Marienthal, all of that area ended up under Canyon Lake. But through it all, the river road remains. So even today, you can drive up a road that the earliest German settlers saw in the 1840s. You can camp on the banks of the same river, and you can enjoy the same beautiful views that they did. I think the lesson from the river road, or what made me think of doing this as an episode, is when you drive, and the river road that I described out of New Braunfels is not the only one in the state. There's a ton of these river roads all over the state, especially in Central Texas and the Hill Country. And I encourage you to take your time when you're traveling through there. Maybe turn off the main road from time to time. See what's around the next bend. And if you think it's beautiful now, imagine what these settlers must have thought coming to this new land and seeing all these sights. I also have to mention specifically, the idea for this episode came from an article by Tara Kohlenberg in the New Braunfels Herald Zeitung newspaper, May 30th, 2026, when she wrote about the River Road and its history. Thanks, Tara. Well, now we come to the part of the episode I call Getting There, where I tell you how to go see what I talked about in the episode. The River Road speaks for itself in New Braunfels. Get your map app out, or your map, if you still have one, and look for the River Road running sort of north out of town to Sattler, and take a little cruise down that river. When you get to New Braunfels, be sure and visit the Sophienberg Museum and Archive on West Call Street, Coll, right there in downtown. It is a fabulous museum. They have a ton of stuff from the German settlers, and if you have ancestors you think were in that area, they have a great archive where you can do some research. I might have even found a little bit out about my own family in that building. Everyone's very nice. It's a wonderful place. And save some time to eat lunch in New Braunfels. The German food is unmatched. Well, that wraps it up for this episode of Wise About Texas. I hope your summer is filled with great travels around this great state. Find us on social media at Wise About Texas on Instagram and Twitter. If you want to support the preservation and promotion of Texas history, go to patreon.com/wiseabouttexas. Thanks again for listening today. Go out and do something for Texas today. And until next time, God bless Texas, and we'll see you down the road.